Fort Rucker, obviously very important to our community. Talk about what's going on there, what's going to happen.
Well, we're so proud of Fort Rucker. It's an enduring installation. Army aviation is critical to our ability to maneuver, to help wounded, to project force, all the things that are critical to military operation. But the Department of Defense has been hammered in spending cuts. Half of the sequester cuts that are in the budget now fall on the Defense Department. And that's not the war. The war is entirely separate. So this is the base defense budget getting half of all the cuts that are there. So it is disproportionate, and it's risking our ability to carry out our mission. And I don't think we need to be in a position where somebody comes back from their second or third tour in Afghanistan and then be given a pink slip and say we don't need you anymore. They were counting on a career. So we've got to watch that, and I'm worried about it. What the House has done, the Republican House, has twice passed legislation that stopped those cuts and had other departments of agencies in the government take the same amount. So it spread the cuts around, because the Defense Department's already taken one phase of reductions. This would be the second, and the second phase is the one that I think goes too far. Well, the question is, can we get some of the defense cuts back? And I think, particularly in light of North Korea and that kind of thing, I think it's possible. As I said, the House has already twice passed legislation that does that. Many senators say they want to do that. The person that's really stopping it is the President of the United States. President Obama thought, I think, that he could say, if you don't raise taxes even more than I've raised them already, then I'll cut your defense budget. But he's the commander-in-chief of all the military, and he has a duty to this country. And I believe he needs to stand up and recognize that we ought to find other places to cut in the government and not so much in the Defense Department. The Defense Department can tighten its belt too. There's no doubt about that. But I truly believe so far that the cuts have been disproportionate and even potentially damaging, and I'm worried about it. And there are a lot of programs. For example, the food stamp program. It's gone from $20 billion to $80 billion in 10 years. It's gone up 4 times. Got 0 cuts. Medicaid has been growing at 5, 6, 7% a year. Got 0 cuts. The Defense Department's base budget's only been going at 2 or 3% a year for the last decade only, but it's been growing at that rate even during wartime. And so they got hammered in this process, and that's where I think we've gone wrong. If the president would step forward, I think something could happen quickly. And I remember vividly in the debate that moment when he said the sequester will never happen. He promised that it wasn't happening, but he's not helping us at this point, I gotta say.
High-ranking officials come and visit Fort Rucker recently, the Secretary of the Army, and many of them say, unfortunately, these defense cuts are they're going to first focus on protecting those going into theater and then worry about the rest of the trickle down effect. How important is it to fight for Fort Rucker as your position, and what do you think they're going to fight for as far as defense?
Well, Fort Rucker is just critical to national defense. You cannot have a modern military without the aviation component, and this is a core function of our modern military. I mean, it's just absolutely so. So we've got to try to make sure that damage does not get done. But the military, I mean, I spent over a year ago, I was working to have them lay out where those cuts would fall so we could go to the public and go to the president and say, this is unacceptable. They declined to do so, I'm sure at the president's direction. So it took a long time for them finally to say where the cuts are going to fall, only earlier this year, and it's been a little hard to highlight for the American people. And the American people rightly think government spends too much money and it's time for it to tighten its belt. But they haven't, I don't think, fully understood how many agencies are having zero cuts that need to be looked at. What we did, if you recall, it all came out of the Budget Control Act of August 2011, when the debt ceiling was raised $2.1 trillion, and we promised to cut spending $2.1 trillion. Then they said for $1 trillion of that, 1.1, a committee was supposed to do it. And if they didn't, the cuts would fall according to the sequester. If the committee didn't reach it, this was all done in the late hours of the night, not made public, dropped down, yes or no vote. And I spotted, being ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, the danger to the Defense Department then. One reason I voted against the bill. And sure enough, the committee didn't reach an agreement. And as a result, we're in a pickle now, and other things weren't cut. And except for the defense budget, over 10 years, the defense budget will take about 15% real reduction in spending. In inflation-adjusted dollars, the remaining 5/6 of the federal government will increase 35%. So I do think it's critical that the Commander-in-Chief step forward, reach out to the House of Representatives,